So your mother chose money and decided you were the price. Alexander Volkov spoke the words without raising his voice. Nina Carter felt the air leave her lungs. No, she whispered. Her mother's hand pressed firmly against her back, forcing her one step forward. This is what we agreed, Margaret said quickly, her tone tight. She is capable, reliable. She will not cause problems. Nina turned toward her, eyes wide. You told me we were meeting a lawyer. Margaret did not look at her. This is a solution. You can't, Nina's voice broke. You can't give me to someone like this. Alexander remained still, observing the exchange with controlled patience. Margaret's voice sharpened. Enough. You owe me. I paid your debts, Nina said, trembling. I covered the rent. I worked overtime for 2 years, and yet we are still here, Margaret replied coldly. Alexander finally stepped forward. You are suggesting, he said slowly, that your daughter is repayment for what you owe. Margaret lifted her chin. Yes. Nina shook her head immediately. No, that's not true. Margaret grabbed her wrist tightly. You will stop embarrassing me. Nina winced. You can't do this, she said, tears forming. I am not something you trade. Margaret's voice dropped to a hiss. You are part of this family. You fix family problems. I have been fixing them, Nina whispered. Since Dad died, I've been fixing everything. Silence filled the room. Alexander's gaze shifted to the faint bruising on Nina's wrist. You were not informed of this arrangement, he said. Nina swallowed hard. No, Margaret forced a strained smile. She is emotional. She will understand in time. Nina shook her head, panic rising. You can't leave me here, she said, voice breaking completely. Mom, please, you can't do this to me. Margaret avoided her eyes. This is temporary. You said that about the credit cards, about the loans, about everything. Her breath became uneven. I stayed when everyone else left. I believed you. Margaret exhaled impatiently. You are overreacting. I am your daughter, Nina whispered. You don't sell your daughter. Alexander's expression hardened slightly. Miss Carter, he said calmly. When did you last eat? The question startled her. Yesterday morning. Margaret waved dismissively. She refuses to eat when she is upset. Alexander did not look away from Nina. Were you instructed not to eat today? Margaret's composure slipped. That is irrelevant. No, Alexander replied quietly. It is very relevant. Nina wiped her tears quickly, embarrassed. I'm sorry, she said automatically. Alexander studied her reaction carefully. You apologize often. I try not to cause problems. Margaret scoffed. She has always been sensitive. Nina looked at her mother again. Please, don't leave me here. Margaret's eyes hardened. This is what responsible adults do. We solve financial problems. With their children? Nina asked, her voice barely audible. Margaret did not answer. Alexander placed his glass down slowly. You assigned a financial value to her life, he said. Margaret crossed her arms defensively. You misunderstand. No, Alexander replied calmly. I understand perfectly. He turned slightly toward Nina. You were presented as payment. Nina closed her eyes briefly. She can't mean that, she whispered. Margaret spoke sharply. This conversation is finished. No, Nina said, surprising herself. It isn't. Her hands trembled at her sides. You promised things would get better. They will, Margaret replied. This is part of that process. You didn't tell me I was the process. Silence stretched. Alexander's voice remained steady. Mrs. Carter, leave. Margaret blinked. We have not finalized terms. There are no terms. Margaret's jaw tightened. You owe me consideration. Alexander's tone did not change. You owe her honesty. Margaret hesitated. You are making a mistake. No, Alexander said quietly. You already did. Margaret looked between them, calculating. You will regret interfering in family matters. Alexander did not respond. Margaret adjusted her coat and walked toward the door. She did not look back. The door closed softly. Nina stared at the floor, tears falling freely now. I don't understand, she whispered. She can't just decide I belong to someone. Alexander gestured toward the chair near the fireplace. Sit. She obeyed slowly. Her hands would not stop shaking. She said I owed her everything, Nina said quietly. Debt does not transfer ownership. Alexander replied. I should have fixed this, she murmured. You are not responsible for another person's greed. Her voice cracked again. She's my mother. Alexander studied her expression carefully. Yes, he said. And she failed you. Nina inhaled shakily. What happens now? You eat. Alexander replied calmly. He pressed a button on the desk. Food. And have the doctor come tonight. You don't have to do that, Nina said quickly. Yes, he said. I do. She looked at him, confused. Why? Alexander paused briefly before answering. Because being owed money does not entitle anyone to sell a human being. Nina's voice trembled. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. For now, Alexander said. You rest. She hesitated. You're not going to make me stay? You are free to leave, he replied. Nina let out a fragile laugh. I don't have anywhere else to go. Alexander nodded once. Then for tonight, you are safe here. Nina lowered her eyes again, overwhelmed by the unfamiliar feeling. For the first time since walking through the door, she allowed herself to breathe. And that frightened her more than anything else. Nina did not sleep much that night. The room she had been given was larger than her entire apartment in Boston. The bed was neatly made with crisp white sheets that smelled faintly of lavender. A soft lamp illuminated the corner near a writing desk. Everything felt carefully chosen, deliberate, almost respectful. It made her uneasy. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Her coat still wrapped around her shoulders, unsure whether she was allowed to relax. The silence felt unfamiliar. In her old life, silence usually meant someone was angry. A gentle knock came at the door. Miss Carter? A calm female voice asked. Nina stood immediately. Yes. A woman in her early 50s entered, dressed simply but elegantly. My name is Mrs. Davenport, she said warmly. Mr. Volkov asked me to make sure you have everything you need. I don't need anything, Nina answered quickly. Mrs. Davenport offered a small knowing smile. That is what people often say when they need the most help. Nina looked down. I don't want to cause trouble. You are not causing trouble, Mrs. Davenport replied gently. You are recovering from one. A tray was placed on the small table near the window. Soup, bread, tea, simple food, safe food. Nina stared at it for a moment. You should try, Mrs. Davenport said kindly. Just a little. I'm not very hungry. That is understandable. Mrs. Davenport moved slowly toward the door, pausing before leaving. Mr. Volkov does not tolerate cruelty inside this house, she said softly. The door closed quietly behind her. Nina remained standing for a moment before carefully removing her coat. She sat at the table and stared at the soup. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the spoon. The first bite felt strange. Warm. Uncomplicated. She had not realized how tense her body had been until the warmth settled into her chest. Halfway through the bowl, she stopped suddenly, overwhelmed by the realization that no one was watching her eat. No one was criticizing how slowly she moved. No one was reminding her how expensive food had become. She placed the spoon down carefully and pressed her fingers against her eyes. You're safe, she whispered quietly, unsure if she believed it. If this moment touched your heart, tell me where you are watching from. And if this story speaks to you, leave the #1 inch the comments. Like the video and subscribe to the channel so more stories about dignity, courage, and quiet justice can reach those who need them most. The next morning, sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Nina woke slowly, disoriented by the quiet comfort of the bed beneath her. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then everything returned at once. Her mother's voice. The drive. Alexander's words. You were presented as payment. Her chest tightened again. She dressed quickly in the clothes provided in the wardrobe. Simple, neutral colors, comfortable fabrics. Nothing revealing, nothing demanding attention. When she stepped into the hallway, she hesitated, unsure whether she was allowed to explore. Voices drifted from the kitchen downstairs. Nina followed the sound cautiously. Alexander stood near the counter, reading from a tablet while a cup of black coffee rested beside him. He did not look surprised when she entered. "You slept," he observed. "A little." "Sit." Nina obeyed automatically. A plate of scrambled eggs, toast, and fruit sat waiting. She hesitated. "I can prepare something myself," she said quietly. "You are not staff," Alexander replied calmly. "I'm used to working. I am aware." She sat slowly, unsure where to place her hands. "You may eat," he said. She picked up the fork cautiously. The food was simple but fresh. She forced herself to take small bites, still adjusting to the unfamiliar sense of being cared for without expectation. Alexander watched briefly, then returned to his tablet. After a moment, Nina spoke. "I won't stay long." Alexander did not look up. "That decision is yours. I don't want to create complications for you. You did not create this situation." She swallowed carefully. "My mother believes everything is temporary. Some people rely on temporary solutions until consequences become permanent." Nina looked down at her plate. "She wasn't always like this." "What changed?" "After my father died, things became difficult." Alexander nodded slightly. "Grief reveals character." She said we needed help, and she chose deception. Nina tightened her grip on the fork. "She used to tell me family protects each other." Alexander's expression remained neutral. "Some people confuse protection with control." She hesitated before asking quietly, "Why did you send her away?" Alexander set the tablet aside. "Because I do not accept human collateral." Her eyes lifted slowly. "You could have." "Yes, but you didn't." "No." Silence stretched between them. "You don't even know me," Nina said. "I know enough." "What does that mean?" "It means," Alexander replied calmly, "that desperation leaves visible patterns." She lowered her gaze again. "I should leave." "You may leave whenever you choose." "And go where?" "That is a question only you can answer." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "I don't think I have many options left." Alexander did not immediately respond. "Your mother's financial activity has been extensive." Nina looked up. "I don't understand numbers like she does." "She acquired significant debt. I assumed it was manageable. It is not." Her shoulders stiffened. "Am I in danger?" Alexander studied her carefully. "You are not in danger here." "That wasn't what I asked." "No," he said quietly. "It wasn't." Her voice dropped. "Did she really intend to trade me?" "Yes." Nina's breath caught again. "I kept thinking she would change her mind in the car." She did not. She didn't even look back. "No." Nina stared at the table. "I don't know how to process that." "You are not required to process everything immediately." She exhaled slowly. "I always thought if I worked hard enough, things would stabilize. Hard work does not cure dishonesty." She nodded faintly. "That explains a lot." A brief pause followed. "I noticed the watch," Alexander said. Nina instinctively touched her pocket. "My father's." "You keep it close." "It reminds me that some things keep going, even when people fail us." She nodded. He believed responsibility mattered. Alexander's tone softened slightly. "That belief is not wrong." Nina looked uncertain. "Responsibility should not require sacrifice of dignity." She studied him carefully. "You speak like someone who has seen this before." "I have." Another pause. "Will she try to contact you?" he asked. "She usually does when she needs something." "If she does, inform me." "You don't trust her." "No." Nina hesitated. "I don't know if I do either anymore." Alexander stood. "You will have time to decide what comes next." "I don't usually get time." "You do now." She looked around the quiet kitchen. "I feel like I'm waiting for something bad to happen. That feeling may take time to fade." "Does it ever fade?" "Sometimes. And if it doesn't, then you learn to live without fear controlling your decisions." She absorbed that slowly. "You speak very carefully." "I speak accurately." She allowed herself a small breath. "I don't know what you expect from me." "Nothing," Alexander said calmly. "That makes me nervous." "That is understandable." She finished the last bite of toast. "What happens today?" "You rest." "And tomorrow?" "We discuss options." "You're not going to ask for anything?" "No." She looked at him carefully. "Why?" Alexander paused briefly before answering. "Because being owed money does not give me the right to own a person." The words settled quietly between them. For the first time since leaving Boston, Nina did not feel like she needed to apologize for existing. She was not safe yet. She was not certain of anything. But something inside her, something small and exhausted, had stopped bracing for impact. And that was new. The third day felt longer than the first two combined. Nina woke before sunrise again, her body still obeying habits built over years of quiet discipline. For a moment, she forgot where she was, reaching instinctively toward the small bedside table expecting to find the chipped ceramic lamp from her Boston apartment. Instead, her hand touched polished wood. The unfamiliar stillness returned immediately. She sat up slowly, pressing her fingers against her temples as if her thoughts needed time to catch up with her surroundings. No shouting, no footsteps outside her door, no tension in the air. Only silence. She dressed in the same simple clothes provided in the wardrobe. Soft gray sweater, dark slacks, comfortable shoes. Nothing extravagant. Nothing designed to impress. Everything designed to allow movement without discomfort. That detail unsettled her more than luxury would have. Someone had considered practicality. Downstairs, the house was already awake in quiet ways. The faint aroma of coffee drifted through the corridor. Nina followed the scent cautiously until she reached the kitchen. Mrs. Davenport stood at the counter slicing fresh fruit with steady precision. "You are up early," she said without turning. "I didn't want to oversleep. There is no schedule you must follow here. I'm used to having one." Mrs. Davenport nodded approvingly. Structure can feel safe. Nina hesitated near the doorway. "Is there anything I should be doing?" Mrs. Davenport gave her a measured look. "You are not employed here. I know. I just prefer being useful." "Usefulness is not the same as worth," Mrs. Davenport replied gently. Nina absorbed that silently. Alexander entered moments later, already dressed in a dark suit despite the early hour. He carried a folder and a phone, both placed neatly beside his coffee cup. "You are adapting," he observed. "I don't know if that's good or bad. It is necessary." She remained standing. "You may sit," he added. Nina sat slowly, folding her hands together. "I reviewed financial records last night," Alexander said calmly. Her stomach tightened immediately. "I don't know most of what she did. I am aware. You think I was involved?" "No." She blinked in surprise. "You didn't hesitate. Your behavior does not suggest deception." Nina exhaled slowly. Tension she had not realized she was holding easing slightly. "She handled everything after my father died," Nina admitted quietly. "I trusted her. Trust is often exploited by those who depend on silence." Nina nodded faintly. "I should have asked more questions. You should not have needed to." She hesitated before speaking again. "What happens to her now? That depends on choices she has already made." "That sounds serious." "It is." Nina looked down at her hands. "I never imagined she would go this far." Alexander studied her expression carefully. Financial pressure reveals priorities. She used to worry about what neighbors thought. Appearances often matter most to those with something to hide. Nina gave a small, tired smile. "That sounds accurate." Mrs. Davenport placed a plate in front of Nina. Eggs, toast, and sliced apple. "You should eat before worrying about problems," she said kindly. Nina picked up the fork slowly. "I'm not very hungry." "Eat anyway," Mrs. Davenport replied gently. "Strength supports clarity." Nina obeyed. Alexander opened the folder beside him. "There are additional concerns." Her fork paused mid-air. "What kind of concerns?" "Your mother obtained a life insurance policy in your name 3 months ago." Nina froze. What? $2.5 million. Her fingers tightened around the fork. She said it was a safety precaution. Did she explain the amount? No. She also contacted individuals connected to staged accidents. The room felt suddenly colder. "You mean, she planned?" "Yes." Nina set the fork down carefully, as though sudden movement might shatter something fragile inside her chest. "She told me to avoid driving at night," Nina whispered. "She said the roads were dangerous." Alexander did not interrupt. "She kept insisting I update my emergency contacts." Her breathing became uneven. "I thought she was worried about me." Alexander closed the folder. "She was worried about her finances." Nina covered her mouth with her hand. eyes filling with disbelief. I kept defending her, she said quietly, even when things didn't make sense. That is common, she said. Family protects family. Family should, Alexander replied calmly, but not all families deserve loyalty. Nina swallowed hard. I don't know how to think about her anymore. You do not need to decide immediately. Silence settled briefly. Am I safe here? She asked finally. Yes. From her? Yes. What about the people she owes? They answer to me. Her eyes lifted slightly. You make that sound simple. It is not simple, he replied, but it is controlled. She absorbed that carefully. I don't want to create problems for you. You did not create this situation, but I am part of it now. Yes. That honesty felt strangely reassuring. What happens next? She asked. You regain stability. That sounds vague. It is intentionally vague. She almost smiled. I usually have a checklist. Then we create one. She nodded slowly. That would help. First, Alexander continued, you eat regularly. I can manage that. Second, you rest. I am trying. Third, you stop assuming every conversation ends badly. That one may take longer. I expected that. She took another small bite of toast. Why are you helping me? She asked quietly. Alexander considered the question carefully. Because someone should have helped sooner. That is not really an answer. It is the only one I am offering today. Nina studied his expression. You don't talk about yourself much. I speak when information is useful. Am I useful? You are observant. That's not the same thing. No, he agreed calmly. It is often better. Mrs. Davenport collected the empty coffee cup beside Alexander. You will find clarity returns gradually, she told Nina gently. I hope so. You have already begun asking better questions. Nina considered that. I don't know what my life looks like now. Uncertain does not mean hopeless, Mrs. Davenport replied. Alexander stood, adjusting the sleeve of his jacket. I have meetings this morning, he said. Security will remain present. I don't need protection, Nina said automatically. You do. She did not argue. Mrs. Davenport will show you the library, he added. Quiet environments encourage perspective. I like libraries. I suspected you might. He paused briefly before leaving. You are not alone in this situation, he said calmly. The words followed her long after he exited the room. Later that morning, Nina stood inside a library larger than any she had seen outside of universities. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined the walls. A rolling ladder rested beside rows of carefully arranged volumes. The room smelled faintly of old paper and polished oak. She ran her fingers lightly along the spines of books without removing any. Careful, respectful, still uncertain what she was allowed to touch. Mrs. Davenport watched from the doorway. You do not need permission here, she said kindly. I'm used to asking. That habit may change. Nina nodded slowly. I don't know who I am without those habits. You will. Nina selected a book at random and sat near the tall window overlooking the quiet grounds. Her father's watch rested in her palm again. For the first time in many months, the sound did not feel like pressure. It felt like possibility. The library became Nina's refuge over the following days. It was the only place in the house where silence did not feel heavy. Tall windows allowed pale morning light to stretch across polished wooden floors, illuminating dust particles that moved slowly in the air like quiet reminders that time continued whether she felt ready or not. She had always liked spaces built for reflection. Libraries suggested patience. Knowledge did not rush. It waited. Nina sat at a large oak table reviewing a book on financial ethics she had found among the neatly arranged shelves. She was not searching for answers yet, only structure. Structure helped calm her thoughts. A faint sound interrupted her concentration. Footsteps. Measured, unhurried. Alexander entered without announcement, a folder tucked beneath his arm. You read quickly, he observed. Nina closed the book gently. I read carefully. Both are useful. She hesitated. I didn't want to disturb anything. You are not disturbing anything. She nodded. I am still learning what is allowed. That will take time. He placed the folder on the table but did not open it. You organize information well, he said. I worked in a hotel. Order prevents complaints. Order prevents chaos, he corrected. She almost smiled. That too. Alexander gestured toward the books. What did you find? Patterns, Nina answered honestly. In what sense? People justify harmful decisions when they believe they have no alternatives. And do they? Sometimes, she admitted, but sometimes they just want an easier outcome. Alexander studied her expression carefully. You understand more than you suggest. I spent years listening, she said quietly. Listening often reveals truth others miss. Nina glanced at the folder beside him. Does that contain information about my mother? Yes. Her shoulders tensed slightly. I would like to know. Alexander opened the folder calmly. Your mother borrowed from multiple private lenders. I suspected that. She falsified charity reports to conceal losses. That sounds like her. She used your name as a financial reference. Nina blinked. I never signed anything. You did not need to. That doesn't sound legal. It is not. She exhaled slowly. I should have noticed sooner. You trusted her. That feels like a mistake now. It was loyalty, Alexander replied. Loyalty should not require blindness. She considered that carefully. What happens to people who do things like this? They face consequences. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the table. She won't admit fault. Many people do not. She always says she did what she had to do. Survival is often used as justification for cruelty. Nina nodded faintly. That sounds familiar. Alexander closed the folder. There is more. She waited. A business associate of your mother contacted one of my partners yesterday. Her attention sharpened immediately. Why? To inquire about your status. Nina felt a quiet chill move through her chest. She's already trying to recover control. Yes. Does she think I belong to you now? That is likely her assumption. Nina lowered her gaze. She never liked uncertainty. Control creates the illusion of security. She used to tell me that if you manage appearances, everything else can be adjusted later. Appearances rarely survive investigation. Nina's voice softened. She cared more about how things looked than how they felt. That is common. Silence stretched for a moment. I don't want her hurt, Nina said finally. Alexander watched her carefully. You do not need to protect her. She is still my mother. That does not excuse her actions. No, Nina agreed quietly, but it complicates them. Alexander nodded once. You are capable of holding two truths simultaneously. That doesn't make them easier. No. She folded her hands together. What do you expect me to do? For now, observe. That's all? That is often the most productive beginning. She hesitated before speaking again. I am not used to being asked what I want. What do you want? The question unsettled her. I want stability. That is reasonable. I want to stop feeling like something bad is about to happen. That will require time. I am not very patient. You are more patient than you believe. She considered that quietly. I also want to stop feeling responsible for her decisions. That responsibility was never yours. It felt like it was. Feeling does not equal fact. She nodded slowly. I used to think if I worked harder, she would stop worrying. Some people do not want solutions, Alexander said calmly. They want control. That explains a lot. Mrs. Davenport entered briefly with tea. Chamomile, she said gently. It helps the mind settle. Nina accepted the cup gratefully. Thank you. Mrs. Davenport looked between them thoughtfully. Some lessons take repetition, she added softly before leaving. Nina watched the steam rise from the tea. I don't understand why you are helping me. Alexander considered the question carefully. You notice details others ignore. That does not explain kindness. Kindness is often misunderstood. In what way? It is frequently mistaken for weakness. I never thought that. Your behavior suggests otherwise. She looked up. I learned to avoid conflict. That is not the same as weakness. It felt safer. Safety and silence are not identical. She absorbed that slowly. Will she try to contact me directly? Yes. And what should I do? You decide whether to respond. That feels like a test. It is an opportunity. She gave a small, uncertain laugh. I am out of practice making choices. That will change. She looked toward the tall windows. What happens if she asks me to return? Alexander answered without hesitation. You are free to choose. And if I choose not to, then that decision will be respected. She nodded slowly. I don't think she has ever respected a decision I made. Then this will be new. Nina held the warm cup carefully. I used to believe family meant protection. It should. And if it doesn't, then you build protection elsewhere. Her voice grew quiet. That sounds lonely. Not always. She met his eyes briefly. You speak like someone who learned that personally. I did. Another pause settled between them. I noticed you repaired the damaged book yesterday, he said. The spine was loose. Most people would have discarded it. It still had value. Alexander nodded slightly. That perspective is rare. My father believed most things deserve patience. That belief appears accurate. She smiled faintly for the first time. I don't feel very valuable right now. That feeling is temporary. You sound certain. I am. She studied his expression carefully. You speak like someone who is used to being believed. I speak like someone who has observed patterns. Am I predictable? You are consistent. That sounds like a polite way of saying cautious. Caution preserves clarity. She accepted that quietly. I am trying to understand what my life looks like now. That picture will become clearer. And if it doesn't, then you adjust the frame. She almost laughed. That sounds philosophical. It is practical. The conversation slowed naturally, leaving space for thought. For the first time in weeks, Nina did not feel rushed toward a decision she did not understand. Her father's watch rested lightly in her palm again. The sound no longer felt like a countdown. It felt like time returning to her. Rain arrived quietly that afternoon, soft against the tall windows of the estate, turning the sky a muted gray that made time feel slower. Nina remained in the library longer than usual, her attention moving between pages without fully absorbing the words. Information about her mother continued circling her thoughts like an unfinished conversation. Life insurance, false charity accounts, hidden debts. Each new detail felt like discovering another locked door in a house she thought she knew. She closed the book gently when she sensed someone at the doorway. Alexander did not interrupt her immediately. He waited, allowing her the choice to acknowledge his presence first. You read the same page 3 times, he observed calmly. Nina exhaled softly. I suppose I'm distracted. That is understandable. She turned in her chair. Did something happen? Yes. Her posture straightened automatically. Is it about her? Yes. Nina folded her hands together. I want to know. Alexander stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Your mother contacted one of the lenders this morning. That doesn't surprise me. She attempted to renegotiate her debt. Nina frowned slightly. How? By offering information. Her stomach tightened. What kind of information? Information about you. Silence settled heavily between them. What did she say? She claimed you are unstable, Alexander replied evenly. Nina's fingers curled inward. She always says that when she loses control. She implied you may attempt to create problems for her publicly. That sounds like preparation. It is. Nina nodded slowly. She is protecting herself. Yes. Does she think I would expose her? That depends on what you decide. Nina stood and walked slowly toward the window. I never imagined I would need to think about exposing my own mother. Alexander watched her carefully. Your situation is not typical. No, she said quietly. It isn't. Rain traced faint lines down the glass. She used to tell me reputation was everything, Nina continued. Reputation is often confused with character. She believed perception mattered more than truth. Many people do. Nina pressed her palm lightly against the cool window. I used to help her prepare documents. Alexander did not interrupt. She would ask me to proofread letters to donors. Her voice slowed. I thought she was careful. She was strategic. I didn't realize strategy could include harming your own family. Alexander's tone remained calm. Some people treat relationships as assets. That sounds lonely. It often is. Nina turned back toward him. What exactly did she say about me? That you are emotional. She gave a faint smile. That has always been her word for inconvenient. She also suggested you might attempt to manipulate sympathy. That sounds like projection. Alexander inclined his head slightly. Likely. Nina returned to her chair slowly. I am not trying to manipulate anyone. I am aware. I just want stability. That remains the priority. She hesitated before asking, does this situation create problems for you? It creates activity. That sounds like a careful way of saying yes. Alexander did not deny it. My associates are monitoring developments. I don't want to cause conflict. You did not initiate this. But I am part of it now. Yes, Nina absorbed that quietly. What happens if she continues? She will face investigation. She will blame me. That is probable. She always blames someone else. Alexander studied her expression. Does that surprise you? No. Does it hurt? Yes. The honesty lingered. She used to tell me sacrifice proved love, Nina said quietly. Sacrifice should be voluntary. I thought loyalty meant endurance. Endurance without boundaries becomes exploitation. She nodded faintly. I am learning that. Alexander placed a document on the table. This is a summary of accounts linked to her activities. Nina did not reach for it immediately. I don't know if I am ready to see numbers attached to betrayal. You may take your time. She eventually opened the first page. Columns of transactions filled the document. Dates, transfers, withdrawals, amounts she had never seen in her personal life. She said she couldn't afford groceries last winter, Nina murmured. Alexander remained silent. She borrowed money that week, Nina continued quietly. Her finger traced the date. I remember working overtime because she said things were tight. Her voice grew softer. I thought I was helping. You were trying. I was trying to solve a problem she didn't want solved. That appears accurate. Nina closed the folder gently. I feel foolish. You feel betrayed. That too. She exhaled slowly. I don't want revenge. That is wise. I just want the truth to exist somewhere. It does. Not publicly. Not yet. Nina hesitated. I am not prepared for public attention. That is not required immediately. I don't want to destroy her life. She has already compromised it. That doesn't make this easier. No. Another quiet pause followed. I keep thinking about the night she asked me to wear that dress, Nina said. What do you remember? She seemed nervous. That is consistent with pressure. I thought she was worried about money. She was. I just didn't think I was the solution. Alexander did not respond. Nina gave a small, tired laugh. I should have noticed something. You trusted her. That explanation feels incomplete. Trust does not eliminate accountability. She nodded slowly. I don't know how to think about family anymore. Family is defined by behavior, not biology. That is a difficult adjustment. Most meaningful adjustments are. She looked toward the rain again. Will she try to speak with me directly? Yes. What should I say? That depends on what you believe. I believe she crossed a line. That is clear. I also believe she is still my mother. That is also clear. Nina's voice softened. I don't know how to hold both truths. You allow them to coexist. That sounds complicated. It is. She rested her hands on the table. I want to handle this without becoming cruel. That is possible. How? By allowing consequences without adding malice. She considered that carefully. That sounds difficult. It is also sustainable. She nodded slowly. I would like to try. Alexander closed the folder. Then we proceed carefully. She looked up. You speak as if this is a partnership. In certain respects, it is. Nina seemed surprised. I am not experienced in partnerships. You are learning quickly. She gave a faint smile. I am motivated. Motivation improves outcomes. Rain continued tapping softly against the glass. I don't feel like a victim right now, Nina admitted quietly. That is progress. I feel uncertain, but not powerless. That is also progress. She picked up the folder again, this time without hesitation. What is the next step? For now, awareness. That feels manageable. It is. She met his eyes briefly. Thank you for telling me the truth. You asked for it. I'm glad I did. Alexander nodded once. Truth creates options. Nina absorbed the words carefully. For the first time since leaving Boston, she did not feel like she was reacting to events she could not understand. She was beginning to see the structure of the problem. And structure, she knew, could be navigated, even when the map was unfamiliar. On the 6th morning, Nina noticed something had changed inside her. The uncertainty remained, but the constant tension had softened just enough for her thoughts to move more clearly. She still woke early, her body unwilling to surrender habits formed through years of careful survival. Yet now, when she opened her eyes, she did not immediately feel fear pressing against her ribs. Instead, she felt alert, aware, present. She dressed in a simple cream sweater and dark trousers, tying her hair back neatly. The small silver watch rested in her palm for a moment before she slipped it into her pocket. The familiar weight grounded her. When she entered the kitchen, Alexander was already there, reviewing documents beside a cup of coffee. He acknowledged her presence with a brief nod. "You are consistent," he said. "I don't sleep late." That is often the habit of people accustomed to responsibility. Nina sat across from him. "I used to believe responsibility prevented problems. And now, I think it only prevents some of them." Alexander allowed a faint trace of approval to pass across his expression. "That is an accurate adjustment." Mrs. Davenport placed tea beside Nina. "You look steadier today," she said gently. "I feel clearer." "That is progress." After Mrs. Davenport left, Nina spoke quietly. "I reviewed the documents again last night. And? I recognized patterns." Alexander waited. "My mother always escalated when she felt cornered. That aligns with the timeline. She borrowed more when previous debts became visible. Yes, she didn't believe consequences would reach her. Many people rely on delay as strategy." Nina hesitated before continuing. "She used to say that powerful people create their own rules." Alexander closed the folder he was holding. "That statement is partially correct. That worries me." "It should not." "Why not?" "Because power without discipline collapses quickly." She studied him carefully. "You speak from experience." "I speak from observation." Nina considered that quietly. "I don't want to spend my life reacting to her mistakes." "You will not. I want to build something stable." "That is possible." She hesitated. "I may need guidance." "That is available." She folded her hands together. "I don't know where to begin." Alexander considered briefly. "You begin with clarity." "That sounds abstract." "It becomes practical." He slid a small document across the table. "This is a summary of assets your mother placed under your name." Nina's eyes widened. "I didn't know about any assets." "That is because most of them were liabilities." She scanned the page carefully. "I don't understand most of this language." "You will." "You believe that?" "Yes." She exhaled slowly. "I always avoided financial decisions. That may change." "I would prefer that." Alexander studied her expression. "You prefer independence?" "Yes. That requires information." "I am willing to learn." "That is sufficient." Silence settled briefly between them. Nina broke it carefully. "Why are you investing time in teaching me this?" "Because dependency creates vulnerability." "I am already vulnerable." "Less than before." She considered that. "I suppose that is true." Alexander stood and moved toward the window overlooking the quiet grounds. "You notice details," he said. "I notice patterns." "That is rare." "I had to notice patterns. To stay safe." "Yes." He turned slightly toward her. "Pattern recognition can be applied beyond survival." She followed his meaning slowly. "You think I can rebuild something?" "I think you already are." Nina felt an unfamiliar sense of steadiness settle in her chest. "That feels new." "New does not mean impossible." She nodded faintly. "I would like to understand how to prevent situations like this. That requires education." "I am willing." Alexander returned to the table. "There are advisors who can explain financial structures." "That sounds intimidating." "It is manageable." She allowed herself a small smile. "I never imagined I would discuss financial structures with someone like you. Expectations are often inaccurate." "I am learning that." Mrs. Davenport entered briefly with a small plate of sliced apples and almonds. "Thinking requires energy," she said gently. Nina accepted the plate gratefully. "Thank you." After Mrs. Davenport left, Nina spoke again. "I keep replaying the conversation with my mother. That is natural. I keep wondering if there was a moment I could have changed the outcome." Alexander answered calmly. "You did not create the circumstances, but I ignored warning signs. You trusted someone you believed was responsible." "That sounds naive." "That sounds human." She absorbed that quietly. "I don't want bitterness to define what happens next." "That is wise." "I want to understand what went wrong without becoming cynical." "That balance is possible." "How?" "By distinguishing between caution and fear." She nodded slowly. "I want caution. Then you will develop boundaries." "That sounds healthier than avoidance." "It is." She studied the document again. "These accounts, can they be separated from me?" "Yes." "That would help." "It will be arranged." Nina placed the document down carefully. "I would like to contribute to the process." "In what way?" "I want to understand what is happening with my own name." "That is reasonable." He nodded once. I will arrange a meeting with an advisor. Her posture straightened slightly. I appreciate that. You are not obligated to remain uninformed. I have felt uninformed for a long time. That period is ending. She exhaled slowly, relief appearing in her expression. I feel like I am slowly regaining control. That is the objective. Nina hesitated before asking another question. Do you regret becoming involved in this situation? No. You didn't even pause. There is nothing to regret. That surprises me. It should not. Most people would consider this complicated. It is manageable. She considered that carefully. I am not used to someone describing my problems as manageable. Most problems become manageable when examined clearly. She nodded. That makes sense. Another quiet moment passed. I would like to help others avoid situations like this, Nina said softly. Alexander observed her expression closely. That is a constructive direction. I don't know what that looks like yet. You will. She gave a small, uncertain smile. I feel like my life changed direction very quickly. Direction can change without losing stability. I hope that is true. It is. Nina stood slowly, holding the small watch in her hand. For the first time in a long while, she admitted quietly. I feel like I am preparing for something, instead of recovering from something. Alexander inclined his head slightly. That is a significant shift. She nodded. I would like to continue. You will. As she left the room, Nina realized something unfamiliar had replaced the constant tension she had carried for years. It was not confidence. Not yet, but it was momentum. And momentum, she understood, could become strength if given enough time. The call came late in the afternoon. Nina was seated in the library reviewing notes from the financial advisor Alexander had arranged earlier that day. The meeting had been precise, factual, almost clinical. For the first time, complex terminology did not intimidate her. Structure gave her something solid to stand on. Her phone, which had remained silent for days, vibrated softly against the wooden table. An unknown number. Her chest tightened. She did not answer immediately. It rang again, then again. Persistence had always been one of Margaret's most reliable strategies. Alexander entered the room just as the phone stopped vibrating. You are pale, he observed. Nina turned the screen toward him. She found a way to contact me. That was expected. I don't know if I should answer. That decision is yours. The phone vibrated again. Same number. Nina inhaled slowly. I think avoiding this will only delay it. That is likely accurate. She pressed accept. Nina, Margaret's voice came through immediately, tight with urgency. Finally, Nina did not speak at first. I know you're there, Margaret continued. We need to talk. We are talking, Nina replied quietly. You left without explanation. The statement almost made Nina laugh. I was not aware I had a choice. Margaret ignored the remark. You have created unnecessary complications. I didn't create anything. You are staying with him. Yes. You don't understand the situation. I understand more than I did before. Margaret exhaled sharply. He is manipulating you. Nina glanced briefly toward Alexander, who remained silent. No, Nina said calmly. He is not. You think powerful men offer protection without expecting something in return? I think honesty is more reliable than deception. Margaret's tone hardened. You are being naive. Possibly. You need to come home. I don't think that is possible right now. That is not your decision. Nina felt something inside her settle firmly into place. It is now. Margaret paused. You are embarrassing this family. I believe that happened before I arrived here. Margaret's voice sharpened. You owe me loyalty. I offered loyalty for many years. You are ungrateful. I am honest. Silence stretched across the call. You have always been dramatic, Margaret said finally. And you have always avoided accountability. Alexander remained still across the room, listening without interruption. Margaret's voice lowered. You are making a serious mistake. I don't believe I am. You think this man cares about you? I think he respects boundaries. Margaret scoffed. You are confused. I am clearer than I have been in a long time. Margaret's patience fractured. You will regret humiliating me. I did not humiliate you. You allowed strangers to interfere in private matters. I did not invite deception into my life. Margaret's voice became dangerously quiet. You belong with your family. I belong where I am treated with dignity. You are overreacting. No, Nina replied steadily. I am responding. Another long pause followed. You will return, Margaret said finally. I will not. You have no resources. I am learning. You are being influenced. I am being informed. Margaret's frustration became audible. You are not strong enough to navigate this world alone. I am not alone. Margaret's tone sharpened. You trust him? I trust my judgment. That is new. Yes. Margaret exhaled slowly. You always needed guidance. I needed honesty. That is not the same thing. It should have been. Margaret's voice softened artificially. I did everything for you. Nina closed her eyes briefly. No, she said quietly. You did everything for yourself. Silence again. You are emotional, Margaret insisted. I am aware. You are not thinking clearly. I am thinking clearly for the first time in years. Margaret's patience disappeared. If you continue this, consequences will follow. Nina opened her eyes. I am no longer afraid of consequences. You should be. I am not. Margaret spoke through clenched teeth. You will regret turning against your own mother. I did not turn against you. You abandoned me. You traded me. Margaret inhaled sharply. That is an exaggeration. It is a fact. You are repeating things he told you. I am recognizing things I already knew. Margaret's tone grew cold. You are not prepared for the attention this will bring. I am not seeking attention. You will not control this narrative. I am not trying to control anything. Then you will lose everything. I already did. Margaret hesitated. You will contact me again when reality becomes clear. Nina's voice remained steady. I hope reality becomes clear for both of us. Margaret ended the call without saying goodbye. Silence returned to the library. Nina lowered the phone slowly, her hand trembling slightly. You remained calm, Alexander said. I am surprised by that. You spoke with clarity. I was afraid I would feel guilty. Do you? Nina considered the question carefully. I feel sad. That is appropriate. I also feel relieved. That is also appropriate. She sat down slowly. She still believes control will solve everything. That strategy rarely succeeds indefinitely. I think she expected me to panic. You did not. I almost did, but you did not. Nina exhaled slowly. I think something changed when she left that room. Alexander observed her quietly. You recognized your autonomy. I recognized her pattern. That recognition is powerful. She looked down at the phone. I don't think she expected me to disagree. People accustomed to control rarely anticipate resistance. I don't want conflict. You want resolution. Yes. That distinction matters. Nina placed the phone on the table. She will escalate. That is likely. I don't want this to become public spectacle. It may not be avoidable. I would prefer discretion. That remains the priority. She hesitated. What happens if she attempts to create false claims? We respond with facts. I am learning that facts matter more than opinions. They do. She allowed a small breath. I feel steadier than I expected. You prepared. I listened. You adapted. Nina met his eyes briefly. I think I am beginning to understand why clarity matters. Clarity prevents manipulation. I don't want to be manipulated again. You are less vulnerable now. That feels true. She looked toward the window as evening light softened the edges of the room. I used to think strength meant enduring everything quietly. And now? I think strength means deciding what you will no longer endure. Alexander nodded once. That is an accurate definition. Nina rested her hands calmly on the table. I am ready for whatever comes next. That readiness changes outcomes. She allowed herself a small, steady breath. For the first time since receiving the call, her pulse remained even. Fear had not disappeared, but it no longer dictated her choices. And that, she realized, was the beginning of something stronger than survival. The ballroom shimmered with carefully controlled elegance. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm light across polished marble floors, casting soft patterns that made every movement appear deliberate. The annual Carter Foundation Charity Gala had always attracted attention from influential donors, investors, and public figures who valued both reputation and visibility. Nina stood near the entrance, her hands steady at her sides despite the tension quietly building beneath her calm expression. Tonight was not about revenge. It was about truth. Alexander stood beside her, composed as always, dressed in a tailored black suit that communicated authority without arrogance. He did not speak immediately, allowing Nina to observe the room, to breathe, to feel the weight of the moment without rushing her into it. "You can still choose not to do this," he said quietly. Nina shook her head slightly. "No," she replied. "If I walk away now, she will continue believing she was right." Alexander studied her expression carefully. "And what do you believe?" "I believe silence helped create this situation." "That is a fair conclusion." Across the room, Margaret Carter stood surrounded by admirers, her posture confident, her smile practiced. She wore deep emerald silk, chosen deliberately to convey dignity and control. To the outside world, she appeared composed, successful, respected, exactly as she intended. "She looks comfortable," Nina observed quietly. "She believes the narrative remains under her control," Alexander replied. "For now," Nina said. A server passed with glasses of sparkling water. Nina accepted one, but did not drink. "I thought I would feel more nervous," she admitted. "You prepared thoroughly. I learned from watching her." Alexander allowed a subtle nod. Observation creates advantage. Margaret noticed Nina at that moment. Her smile froze. For a fraction of a second, her composure faltered. Then it returned. She excused herself from the group and walked toward them, each step measured, each expression calculated. "Nina," she said, her voice low but sharp beneath the politeness, "I did not expect you." "I imagine not." Margaret's eyes shifted briefly toward Alexander. "You enjoy dramatic entrances." "I prefer honest ones," Nina replied calmly. Margaret's lips tightened. "This is not the place for personal misunderstandings. This is precisely the place for accountability." Margaret's expression hardened. "You are making a scene." "I am correcting one." Margaret lowered her voice further. "You are embarrassing yourself." "I am presenting facts." Alexander remained silent, allowing Nina control of the conversation. Margaret attempted a soft smile for nearby observers. "Darling, you seem upset." "I am clear. You have always been sensitive. I have always been observant." Margaret's patience thinned. "This conversation will continue privately." "No," Nina said calmly. "It will not." Margaret's voice became brittle. "You do not understand the implications of your behavior." "I understand them completely." Margaret leaned closer. "You are jeopardizing everything." "I am revealing everything." The event coordinator approached the stage, tapping the microphone lightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening in support of the Carter Foundation." Polite applause filled the room. Margaret straightened immediately, preparing to resume her public role. Nina spoke softly but firmly. "I would like a moment of your time before your speech." Margaret's eyes flashed with irritation. "This is neither appropriate nor necessary." "It is both." Alexander stepped forward just slightly, enough to signal quiet authority without confrontation. Margaret recognized the shift. "You planned this," she whispered. "I prepared for this," Nina replied. The coordinator looked uncertain as Nina approached the stage. "Miss, may I assist you?" "Yes," Nina said calmly. "I have information relevant to the Foundation's financial transparency." Murmurs spread quietly across the room. Margaret moved quickly toward the stage. "This is a misunderstanding," she insisted. Nina turned toward the audience, her voice steady despite the attention. "For many years, I believed loyalty required silence," she began. "Tonight, I believe accountability requires honesty." Margaret's composure fractured. "Nina, step down." Nina did not move. "A charity built on generosity should reflect integrity," she continued. "Unfortunately, financial records reveal inconsistencies." Margaret attempted to interrupt. "This is a private matter." Nina met her gaze calmly. "Private actions created public consequences." Alexander signaled discreetly toward a technician near the projection screen. Moments later, documents appeared clearly displayed. Transaction histories, insurance policies, financial transfers, dates aligned with Margaret's requests for donations. Whispers spread through the audience. Margaret's voice tightened. "You are misunderstanding standard accounting procedures." Nina remained composed. "I reviewed these records carefully." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "You are being influenced." "I am being informed." Margaret stepped closer. "You will regret this." Nina's voice softened but did not weaken. "I regret believing silence protected anyone." The room grew quieter. One of the foundation's board members stepped forward, studying the projected figures. These numbers require explanation. Margaret's control continued slipping. This presentation is unauthorized. Alexander spoke for the first time. Transparency rarely requires permission. Margaret turned sharply toward him. You orchestrated this. I supported disclosure. Margaret's voice rose slightly. You have no right to interfere. Alexander's tone remained even. Fraud invites scrutiny. Nina continued calmly. I do not stand here seeking punishment, she said. I stand here seeking truth. Margaret's composure broke further. You are ungrateful. I am accountable. A representative from the event's Financial Oversight Committee approached quietly, requesting documentation. Margaret hesitated. I will provide clarification later. Nina shook her head slightly. Clarity delayed becomes clarity denied. Margaret's voice sharpened. You are destroying your own family. Nina met her eyes steadily. No, she said quietly. I am ending a pattern. Security personnel entered discreetly, responding to concerns raised by the board. Margaret's confidence dissolved into visible frustration. This is not finished, she insisted. No, Nina agreed softly. It is beginning. The room filled with subdued conversation as board members requested formal review of the foundation's financial practices. Margaret's image of composure had fractured. Alexander stepped beside Nina as attention shifted toward official procedures. You remained focused, he said quietly. I remained honest. That is often more difficult. Nina watched as the evening's narrative changed direction. I expected to feel victorious, she admitted, and instead, I feel calm. That is often the result of acting with clarity. She exhaled slowly. I did not do this to hurt her. You did this to prevent further harm. Nina nodded faintly. For the first time, she said quietly, I feel like the truth exists outside my thoughts. That changes everything. As the crowd slowly reorganized into smaller conversations, Nina understood something important. Justice did not always feel dramatic. Sometimes it felt quiet, measured, inevitable. And for the first time in years, she did not feel powerless watching events unfold. She had participated in shaping them, and that changed how the future felt. 6 months later, the air felt different. Not quieter, not easier, but steadier. Morning sunlight filtered through large front windows of a modest brick building in a quiet neighborhood just outside Manhattan. The sign beside the entrance read, Carter Financial Recovery Center. The name had taken Nina time to accept. At first, she had not wanted to use the family name. But eventually she realized something important. A name could represent harm, or it could represent change. Inside, the waiting area was simple and welcoming. Comfortable chairs, warm lighting, shelves filled with practical books about financial literacy, emotional resilience, and legal awareness. A framed sentence hung near the reception desk. Dignity should never depend on dependency. Nina adjusted the placement of a folder on the reception counter, aligning the corners carefully, a familiar habit she no longer tried to hide. Precision had once been survival. Now it was confidence. A woman in her late 50s approached hesitantly. I'm not sure I belong here, the woman admitted quietly. Nina offered a reassuring smile. Most people say that at first. I should have noticed what my husband was doing with our accounts, the woman said nervously. Nina shook her head gently. Trust is not a mistake. The woman exhaled slowly. I don't understand where to begin. That is why we begin together. Nina guided her toward a chair. The center had grown gradually over the past months. Financial advisors volunteered weekly. A retired judge offered consultation hours twice a month. A former bank auditor reviewed documents for individuals unsure whether something in their financial lives felt wrong. The work was quiet, necessary, meaningful. Nina had discovered that many people experienced versions of the same problem. Trust used as leverage. She understood that language now. Alexander had helped structure the legal framework of the center, ensuring transparency and protection for those seeking guidance. His involvement remained discreet, exactly as he preferred. He never attended public meetings. He never accepted recognition, but his presence remained constant in decisions that required careful consideration. Late that afternoon, Nina stepped into her office. where a familiar silver watch rested beside her notebook. The sound no longer reminded her of loss. It reminded her of continuity. A gentle knock sounded at the door. Alexander entered, composed as always, dressed in dark gray rather than black. A small but noticeable shift. "You have appointments scheduled through next week," he observed. "That is a good sign," Nina replied. "Demand suggests relevance. I believe people need places where they are not judged for asking questions." "That is accurate." She gestured toward the chair across from her desk. "You are visiting during working hours. I am adapting to your schedule." "That sounds inconvenient." "It is intentional." She smiled faintly. "I reviewed the quarterly summary," she said. "The center is stable. You built stable processes. I had excellent guidance. You made independent decisions. I made informed decisions." Alexander nodded once. "That distinction matters." Nina leaned back slightly, studying him. "I used to think stability meant avoiding problems. And now, I think stability means understanding them. That is sustainable." She hesitated before asking quietly, "Have you heard anything further about her?" Alexander answered calmly. "Legal proceedings continue." Nina absorbed the information without visible reaction. "I hope she eventually understands why this happened." Understanding often arrives slowly. "I am not angry anymore. That is progress. I am still disappointed. That is reasonable." She folded her hands lightly. "I used to believe justice would feel dramatic. And instead, it feels quiet." Alexander's tone remained steady. "Justice often restores balance rather than creating noise. I think I prefer that. Most people do." She glanced toward the window overlooking the street, where people moved with ordinary purpose. "I never imagined my life would change this much. Change often begins with small decisions. I almost stayed silent that night. But you did not. I was afraid. Courage rarely eliminates fear. It just moves forward anyway." Alexander allowed the faintest hint of approval. "That definition is accurate." Nina smiled slightly. "I am still learning." "You are progressing." She reached for the silver watch, turning it gently between her fingers. "My father believed responsibility was a form of respect. That belief appears consistent with your work. I think he would approve of this place." "That is likely." She looked around the office thoughtfully. "I used to feel like I was always reacting to circumstances I could not control. And now, I feel prepared. That changes outcomes." She nodded. "I want the center to expand." "That is possible. I want to reach people earlier, before problems become crises. Prevention is efficient. I want people to understand financial trust before someone exploits it. That is strategic." Nina met his eyes briefly. "I want what happened to me to become useful." "It already has." She exhaled slowly. "For a long time, I thought survival was enough. And now, I think purpose matters more." Alexander considered that carefully. "Purpose stabilizes recovery." "That sounds like something you learned personally." "It is." She did not press further. Their conversations had always respected boundaries. That mutual restraint had become its own form of trust. "I used to think powerful people controlled outcomes," Nina said quietly. "And now, I think clarity controls outcomes. That is more reliable." She smiled. "I no longer feel powerless. That is evident." She stood, walking toward the window. "I am still cautious. That is healthy, but I am not afraid of my own decisions anymore. That is significant." She turned back toward him. "Thank you. You created this. I could not have done it alone." No one builds stability alone. The late afternoon sun softened the edges of the room, casting warm light across the desk. "I remember the first night I arrived at the estate," Nina said quietly. "You were uncertain. I was convinced my life had ended. And now, I think it began that night." Alexander inclined his head slightly. "Perspective often changes with time." She nodded. "I used to believe silence protected people, and now, I believe truth protects dignity. That is a durable principle." She placed the silver watch back on the desk. Tick. Time continued moving forward. But now, it moved with her rather than against her. "I would like to keep building this," she said. "You will, and I would like you to remain involved." "That is acceptable." She smiled softly. "I no longer feel like something was taken from me." That is important. I feel like something was returned. Alexander considered that quietly. Sometimes justice returns more than it removes. Nina nodded. And sometimes, she added gently, the people we fear most become the reason we find our strength. Outside, the rhythm of ordinary life continued. Inside, Nina Carter no longer felt like someone defined by betrayal. She felt like someone defined by choice. And that made all the difference. This story reminds us that loyalty should never require the sacrifice of dignity. Trust is a beautiful human quality, but when trust is abused, silence only allows injustice to grow stronger. True strength is not found in enduring pain quietly, but in recognizing when a line has been crossed and choosing to protect one's self-worth. Justice does not always come with noise or revenge. Sometimes it arrives through calm truth and steady courage. The story teaches that even when betrayal comes from those closest to us, we still have the power to rebuild our lives with integrity, wisdom, and compassion. In the end, our past may shape us, but it does not have the right to define our future. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.